Chapter 16. It was getting dark, and Don noticed that his son wasn't home yet. He looked at a clock in his study and saw that it was a little after 6. A few times, he heard Connor walking around upstairs. Damn this house for not having carpets. He turned back to his printed manuscript, a red pen in his right hand, continuing with the editing, when he heard voices. They were coming from the vent in the ceiling. Connor didn't have a TV in his room, so it couldn't be that. He had someone in his room with him. Don couldn't tell what they were saying, though. His study was directly beneath his nephew's room, which resulted in a lot of overheard conversations. Connor, who knew about the vent, used to think it was funny and would sometimes yell down his dinner order to Don. He wouldn't find it funny now when Don burst into his room to chew him out for breaking the rules. As he quietly made his way upstairs, he thought of the video he'd found. It had to be Connor who had recorded it. It was his camera, and it was found in his room. Connor killed Mr. Lepper. Don could not deny or forget this simple truth. Nor could he decide how to handle the situation. He couldn't turn his nephew over to the police, and he couldn't very well kill him. Connor deserved as much of a chance as Don himself. What about Ethan? Don asked himself. Did you give him a chance? Don had killed his own brother out of fear. He couldn't allow that fear to overcome him again. Connor could live a normal life, curse-free, just like Don's birth father. If only Don knew the secret. The voices grew louder as he grew closer to the room. Jordan and Aaron walked back to her house in silence. Neither of them knew what to say. Jordan didn't know if she believed anything she had heard in Leo's room. Jordan was grateful that she hadn't assaulted him with questions, though. They stood on her front porch now, the motion-activated light shining down on them. The sun had almost set completely, casting the whole neighborhood in blue. "I guess you were right about your cousin," she said. Her face was that of complete puzzlement. "I don't understand what's happening," said Jordan. "I want to talk about this, but I don't know what this is." Aaron nodded. "I'm trying to understand it too. Maybe your cousin hypnotized Leo and Jack?" Jordan considered that for a moment. "Do you really believe that?" he asked her. "No." "Do you believe that Connor is a monster?" "I think you should ask yourself if you believe he is." Jordan blinked at having the question thrown back at him. "I think he's sick." "Me too." "I think he needs help." Before Aaron could reply, the front door opened and Aaron's dad stood there. "Ready to go home, Jordan?" he asked with a friendly smile. "Sure thing, Mr. Springer." Don was right outside Connor's room. The talking had ceased, and Don heard nothing but movement. And then another sound that he couldn't place. Kissing? Was Connor making out with someone? For a moment, Don was struck with indecision. Besides the fact that his nephew was grounded, Don was afraid that if he let the two teens continue, they would end up having sex. Don and his brother hadn't been careful during their first sexual experiences, and both ended up passing the curse to their innocent children. Don couldn't let Connor do the same. He took a deep breath and charged into the room. He met a most unexpected sight. There was no girl in this room, only 2 boys. One was Connor, and the other was Travis Hooper, Aaron's ex-boyfriend. The boys had been making out, but suddenly stopped and looked at Dawn with shock. "Oh," Dawn managed to say. "What the fuck are you doing?" Connor screamed, jumping to his feet. Travis stayed seated. Dawn slowly got over his own shock and stared at his nephew. "What are you doing? You're grounded, remember?" Connor was gay? Dawn hadn't seen that coming. "Don't pretend that's what this is about," Connor continued. "You're mad because I'm gay." Dawn was momentarily stunned by this statement. Finally, he regained his senses and said, "I'm mad that you have a friend over even though you know you're grounded. I don't care that you're gay." "Bullshit!" "That's enough." Dawn pointed a warning finger at his nephew. "You're already in enough trouble. Travis, I suggest you go home now." Travis looked mortified, but got to his feet and headed for Connor's open window, which faced the front yard. "Front door, Travis," Dawn insisted. Without missing a step, the boy turned and headed out into the hall. Dawn watched him go down the stairs and out the front door. Then he turned back to his nephew and said, "Do you want to talk about this?" "Not with you." "So do you want to talk with someone?" Connor didn't reply. He looked so angry. "I'm trying here, Connor. I want to understand you better." "Since when?" the boy suddenly shouted. "All my life you've treated me like a red-headed stepchild, like some kind of freak." "That's not true," Dawn said half-heartedly. Had he really been that transparent? "I can't believe you're lying to my face like this. It's beneath you." Dawn had never seen his nephew so angry before. He suddenly felt a horrible, nauseating vibe coming from Connor. "Just get out, please," Connor yelled, turning his back on his uncle. Dawn left and closed the door behind him. Jordan thanked Mr. Springer as he got out of the car. When he turned to face his house, he got a bad vibe from it. The sun had been replaced by the moon in the sky, giving the house an eerie appearance. Jordan wasn't sure if he even wanted to go inside. Mr. Springer was already driving down the hill, leaving Jordan alone and afraid. Dawn needed air. He stepped out onto the deck and stared at the woods behind his house. The nausea had vanished now that he was far from Connor. Now Dawn knew how Mr. Locke had felt during Connor's tirade in the classroom. Dawn admitted to himself that making his nephew even angrier was not a good idea. But he couldn't let Connor run around breaking rules. He needed structure, needed to know there were consequences to his actions. Dawn remembered all too well what happened to Connor's father. Ethan had been taken under the creature's wing, taught to do evil. The more evil done, the harder it was to break the monster's grip. But Ethan had escaped eventually, though not completely. Dawn had seen a flicker of the curse in his brother's eyes the night he killed him. For a little while, however, Ethan had lived a normal life with a wonderful woman. And Ivy was wonderful. She'd sacrificed herself to the law to save her son. Love had been the key to disrupting the curse. If Connor loved Travis, then Dawn should not interfere with that love. But had the boys been in love the night Mr. Leper was killed? Dawn looked to the woods again. Was there really a Texas Devil in there? He stepped off the deck and climbed onto the trampoline. Instead of bouncing, however, he lay down and stared up at the starry sky. Jordan stepped into the house, overcome with fear. He felt it in his chest, and his vision became cloudy. He'd had nightmares in which he'd confronted unspeakable evil. He felt that same overwhelming fear then, and it always started him awake with his pulse racing. Why did he feel that way now? What was happening? The nausea returned to Don. He thought it may have to do with staring at that sky for too long. Either way, he felt like going back inside and trying to get some sleep. He had to figure out what to do with Connor. If only he could find the cure. The knife slid into Don's back before he could even take a breath. He lay frozen on the trampoline, certain that it was a knife that had penetrated his back. It felt like cold fire inside him. A moment later, it was pulled out. Don gasped and rolled onto his stomach. His breaths were coming out wet and ragged. He tried crawling off the trampoline when the knife stabbed him in his right arm. He screamed but continued crawling. He reached the lip of the trampoline and immediately felt his guts catch on fire. He could hear his blood spilling onto the grass beneath him as the knife was pulled from him. He was dying. He closed his eyes, never knowing who killed him.